The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
You are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, in the northern part of the state that I think is pretty damn terrific. And I'm fortunate. It's sunny today, and number one, and number two, I have a terrific guest who's returning to the airwaves. I don't know if you remember, Lawrence Baldassaro, but you've been on before. You've got a new book.
Right. I'm sorry, Ralph. It's pronounced Baldassaro.
Baldassaro, excuse me.
Right.
And I was a Tikachinsky, so I'm very aware that people can find ways of mispronouncing. So glad we got that straight. And Baldassaro, fittingly, you wrote a book about Italian baseball players. Would you tell me the name of the book? And I know how it came to being, but tell me about the book.
Well, the title is Baseball Italian Style. The subtitle is Great Stories Told by Italian-American Major Leaguers from Crosetti to Piazza. And this book is a result of interviews I did when I was preparing my previous book, Beyond DiMaggio, which was a comprehensive history of Italian-Americans in baseball. And after that book was published, I started to wonder, I'd done about 50 or more interviews, and what was going to happen to these? I mean, if I put them in a repository, just sent the tape somewhere, they'd be accessible only to people who had access to that repository. So why not put them together in a single volume so that they would be accessible to any and all baseball fans? Oh. So that's how this came about.
Terrific.
So there are 44 interviews, and it covers a span of 9 decades. It goes back to 6 players whose careers started in the 1930s, right up to current players such as Joey Votto and Anthony Rizzo. And this is not an interview book in the sense it's not in the format of a question and answer. What I've done is to edit these interviews to eliminate my questions and to make them more readable.
Okay, did you actually interview each and every one of the players, or were you...
Yes. No, I interviewed each and every one of these, and mostly players, but there are also some coaches, managers, general managers, owners, and a couple of umpires.
When did you start the interview process?
My first interview was in June of 1993 when the Yankees were in town, and I interviewed Phil Rizzuto in the visitors' radio booth at County Stadium.
Oh,
and
wow.
At that time, you couldn't, it was a false start in the sense that Phil was, you turned on the recorder, ask him a question, and sit back.
Absolutely.
I mean, he was fabulous. Yeah. But that inspired me then to do, my plan at that time, I was doing an interview with him to get it published in the Elysian Fields Quarterly Journal. But that one went so well, it kind of inspired me to do more, and that led to the idea to write the history of Italians in baseball, and I've continued to do more interviews since that book was published in 2011.
I learned so much from you when you were on earlier, must have been 2.5 years ago now. And what I learned was that Italian Americans suffered prejudice much in the same way blacks, Jews, more so on some levels. I was blown away by that the Irish in early baseball, the Irish and the Italians were so at odds with each other.
Well, it's baseball history is very much like American history. It's a story of successive ethnic groups that came here, immigrating to the United States, and then their children discovering baseball as, one of the major things that taught you what it was to be American in a sense. Everybody gravitated to baseball. And, of course, what they encountered was the same kind of bias and prejudice that their immigrant parents were receiving. Baseball in the early 20th century was touted by journalists and even sociologists as the melting pot, that it embodied all the positive things about American life, fair play, equal opportunity. But in reality, it was not so welcoming to the newcomers. I mean, even when the Irish first tried to get into baseball, and the Germans, when baseball was still dominated by Anglo-Saxons, they didn't have an easy time. And then the Italians and the Jews and Slavs came in the early 20th century, and those kids that tried to break into professional baseball, they weren't welcomed with open arms either. And when they did break in, many of them heard, the old ethnic slurs that were part of the everyday vernacular at that time.
Now, not to pick out Joey Votto, you mentioned him, and he's the only current Italian that comes to mind, and that you did interview him. Were these kids educated by you in your talking? Were they learning from you as you were learning from them? Were they responsive to it? Were they responsive and curious about these things that we're talking about?
It varied. I think the more contemporary players who are further removed from the immigrant generation generally, not exclusively, but generally have less of a sense of ethnic identity, less of a connection to the old country.
Oh, it's that way with Jews too, in every way.
There are exceptions. I mean, one exception that stands out, for example, is Mike Piazza. Mike has a very strong connection to his ethnic roots. He's played for Team Italy in the World Baseball Classic and coached in the first 3 classics. He's been to Italy to help raise money and to train Italians in baseball. He's got a really strong sense of his ethnic identity. But some of the others less so. It varies. It really does.
Okay. Anybody try to big league you along the way?
I not that I was aware. If they did, it went right over my head, but I really don't think so. Once they understood, for example, that I'm a retired professor of Italian. I'm not a media person. I'm not out to make money from these people. In fact, on this book, Baseball Italian Style, any royalties I may earn will all be donated to the Jimmy Fund in Boston, which is the Red Sox official charity, and it has been mine since I was a kid. I idolized Ted Williams, and he was a spokesperson for the Jimmy Fund, raised millions of dollars. So, and
we must give credit to Yawkey. Was it Bob Yawkey?
Yes, Tom Yawkey.
Tom Yawkey, who originated the Jimmy Fund, and to the best of my knowledge, that's the best thing he's ever done in his checkered life.
Yeah, he was a big supporter, but don't forget the Jimmy Fund was founded more by the Boston Braves in '48. When Lou Perini, the first Italian-American owner, was owner of the Braves, and he was a very strong early supporter, so that they were actually the official charity of the Braves.
Until there's nothing good to be said about Yawkey.
Well, no. He really did. When the Red Sox took over in '53, he was a very strong supporter.
Nice of him. Yeah. Nice of him. But that's, I guess I was being humorous. Yawkey.
No, I understand where you're going.
But I didn't know that about the Braves. I respect Perini because of that. And I was a big follower of the Milwaukee Braves after my Giants left New York when I was growing up. So that I have an appreciation for what I consider to be as good a baseball team ever, the 1958 Milwaukee Braves. I followed them very carefully. And they're to the best of my knowledge, there are at least 4 Hall of Famers on that team, and some really solid all ball players that aren't in the Hall. The Del Crandalls, the Joe Adcocks. What a terrific team! Warren Spahn, a Hall of Famer.
Lou Burdett was
Lou
a terrific pitcher.
Right up there, as good for a 5-year period as anybody pitching in the majors. And of course, there was Eddie Matthews and Henry Aaron, to say those two guys in passing. But the role players on that team, the Billy Brutons, the Wes Covingtons, the Andy Pafko, it was just a terrific team. And Perini put that together. And all of a sudden, they were gone from Milwaukee. I never had a losing record. That's a story within itself.
Yeah.
Sad one, because they were so successful right away when they moved to Milwaukee. Do you have a project coming up? Can you follow such a momentous taking? You made it fruition. There's got to be either a tremendous relief that I'm done, or or what's next? Are your wheels spinning in neutral?
Well, the book just came out on March 6th, so it's still fresh, and there's still, publicity to do for the book. So I'll be busy with that for a while yet. And then I don't know. There are a couple of projects that are in the back of my mind, whether I'll pursue them, whether I have the energy to.
Okay.
I'd love to do a biography of Tony Lazzeri, another San Francisco native who is, I think, a forgotten great ball player.
Push
very
him up.
Important person.
Well, you can tell me how does he get that name? Push him up. I'm just curious.
Well, when he was with Salt Lake City in the Pacific Coast League in 1925, and he hit 60 home runs, the first professional ball player to hit 60 home runs. And there was a restaurant owner in Salt Lake City, I can't recall his name right now, but he started calling him Push him up, push him up. And when Lazzeri went to New York with the Yankees, that stuck with him.
Whoa. I guess advanced runners.
Yeah, I think so. And, Lazzeri was a formidable infielder in the 19th.
Push him up to the top, that type of thing,
Yeah. But he was also a power hitter. Don't forget he was a power hitter.
From my Yankee knowledge, I remember the story of he, Frank Crosetti, and Joe DiMaggio going cross country. Well,
Frank Crosetti told me that story when I interviewed him. And he said that, this was Joe DiMaggio's rookie year, 1936. So they offered to drive him, all 3 San Francisco people, drive him to spring training in Florida. And he said, they got to, Georgia or so. They were pretty far across the country, and Lazzeri and Crosetti were doing all the driving. And at one point, Lazzeri says, hey, let's let the kid drive. DiMaggio says, I don't know how to drive. Crosetti said, we didn't say much on the whole trip. They all 3 were really, really quiet.
They were quiet by nature, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it's ironic because Crosetti was the holler guy of the Yankee infield, but off the field, especially with the media, he was very reserved.
Whoa.
And I felt very fortunate that when I spoke with him, he was very forthcoming and in a very nice interview.
How many rings he must have? Probably player, coach, or probably more than Yogi.
He won so many that they reached the point he was an avid hunter, so they stopped giving him rings and they were giving him engraved shotguns.
Oh, okay.
After the World Series.
All right, Stockton, California. Did you make your way out to Stockton?
No, I did a phone interview with Frankie.
Okay.
I went to Napa, California, to interview Dario Lodigiani, who was of that same era.
Yes, mostly a AAA ball player, if I'm not mistaken, in Pacific
Well,
Coast League.
He spent, I think, 6 years in the major leagues. He played for Connie Mack in Philadelphia.
Oh.
Yeah. He said he learned some new language when he was playing in Philadelphia in the city of brotherly love. You know, the terms that were commonly used in the East or all across the country, you know, dago and wop. He said, I got to Philadelphia and they were calling me a guinea. He said, what the hell's a guinea? He had never heard that term.
Well, isn't it nice that our culture transcends states? We can all learn from each other.
Wow. You're right.
Yeah, right, indeed. Why can't they learn love from each other in today's day and age, especially? But no different then. Probably there's that overt and covert stuff that goes on. Is it still existent, and is it more covert? Not just Italians, not just Jews. I mean, is it something that's... what keeps that going? Is it churches, synagogues? What keeps the craziness going? Just off the top of your head.
Well, I think it's much more covert than it used to be. I mean, back in those days, even up to the Second World War, you would see words like dago and wop used in the New York Times and the Sporting News. It was just part of the vernacular. Now, no one would dare in any reputable media use terms like that. Does that mean that the bias is gone? No, because even after the war, for example, Yogi Berra told me that in 1951, 52, he tried to get into a country club in New Jersey. He said they wouldn't let me in. He said they didn't like Italians then. Then he said, I went to an Italian club. I got in there right away. And Dom DiMaggio, same thing when Dom was in the mid-50s. And, after he retired from the Red Sox, he became a self-made millionaire. And he applied to a country club in Massachusetts, and he said he got blackballed. He said, I was Catholic, I was Italian, and a jock. So,
like that
there was still that bias. Yeah.
Well, we talked, if you'll remember, about Dom DiMaggio when we talked about your book on his brother Joe. And what a gentleman Dom DiMaggio was sticks in my head from our conversation. What an absolute prince of a man, loved by his family, adored by the people around him. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I'll tell you, I contacted him because he was coming to Milwaukee for the All-Star game in 2002. And he said, yeah, I'll be happy to meet you. And he was coming the day before for the Fan Fest that precedes the All-Star game. He said, meet me at the arena where they're having this. So I met him when he arrived. He hadn't even been to the hotel yet. We spent time together. He said, well, I'm going to go over to the hotel, check in, and come on over. And I chatted with him there. And then we went to dinner that evening. And then he said, well, what are you doing for breakfast tomorrow morning? So I went to the hotel, and we had breakfast together.
Wow.
And then he said, are you going to the All-Star game tonight? And I had a press pass. I said, yeah, I've got a pass. He said, I've got an extra ticket. You want to sit with me? Now, this is a lifelong Red Sox fan that you're talking to.
I have goosebumps for you at this point.
Here I am sitting watching an All-Star game with a guy that played in 7 of them and started in 3 at a time when, 2 of the outfield positions in the American League were automatically going to his brother Joe and his teammate Ted Williams.
Right.
He was a .298 lifetime hitter. He was a terrific athlete. But to get back to what you were saying, he couldn't have been nicer. He was very intelligent, very articulate, proud of what he had achieved, but not at all boasting about it. In terms of the personal connection with all the people I interviewed, in my mind, he stands out for all those reasons.
Nice.
And then, to top it off, he agreed to write the foreword to Beyond DiMaggio. So.
Oh, wow. Wow. I
Wonderful man.
didn't remember that. So,
Yeah.
wonderful accomplishments. How'd you get into teaching?
When I was in college, I thought about teaching, and I was an English major as an undergraduate. And then I visited Italy while I was in college, and I fell in love with Italy and with my mother. I slept in the same room that my mother was born in this farm compound in this small town in Italy. And I just was hooked. And so then when I went into graduate school, I decided I would go into Italian, and I became a professor of Italian instead. And it was pure serendipity to go to Italy when I did, and get connected with my ethnic background as much as I did, and was very fortunate.
Now, how did you get connected with baseball initially?
Well, baseball is my first love. I mean, I can't remember a time when I didn't play the game, didn't love the game. I played high school, American Legion, one summer of semi-pro ball. So that's always been a very deep connection for me. And so when I was here at the university, a friend, a colleague, was editing a special edition of the Journal of American Culture, and it was about sports. He was academics writing about sports. And we had talked about baseball a lot, so he said, why don't you write one? So I wrote my first baseball piece about my boyhood hero, Ted Williams, and that led me then to collect a lot of material about Ted through his whole career, and Simon & Schuster published that as the Ted Williams Reader, and it just sort of grew from there.
Larry, I have the pleasure of doing a show on this network with Lenny Randall, who was a player for Ted Williams when he managed in Washington. And
yeah, definitely.
He's got some terrific stories about Ted's teaching and how he teaches by taking kids out on fishing boats, and teaches concentration and waiting for the pitch and hands and strengthening hands, and his whole philosophy is based around fishing, and Lenny's stories are terrific. Ted Williams has to be one of the most eclectic, interesting people of all time.
Absolutely, and I had the great privilege of spending about an hour and a half with him, just the two of us at his home. He used to live in the Florida Keys,
right?
And then he moved up to northern Florida when they built this housing establishment. And in return for using Ted's name and image in advertising, they built a home for him. So I visited him at that home up in Citrus Hills, and I wasn't interviewing him. We just sat in his living room. He was there in his shorts with his Dalmatian dog Slugger next to him. And I'll tell you what, I taught in the university for 36 years. I don't think I met any or many people as intelligent as Ted Williams. This man had an insatiable curiosity. We spoke about politics, about stocking salmon in the Connecticut River, just a whole range of things. He was just and he was asking me as many, if not more, questions than I was asking him. I was just blown away by that experience. He was just an incredible human being.
Yeah, and if you combine his wartime experiences with all of the domestic travails, you might say, because he was someone who fought the establishment in every way, held out as a 20-year-old kid, risked the abuse of the papers and the press, didn't mind that, never wore a necktie. And people say, well, he didn't want to. That's a big thing with people. Haircuts, neckties, with people. I just want to wear my garb, if you will, any way I damn well please. Now, does that mean I don't give in and have to do it. He gave in even less than me. So
he was true to himself. There's no doubt about that.
And
willing to pay the price.
Willing to pay the price, and there is a price to be paid being true to yourself for whatever that is. And I can assure you that it would be much easier in life to have a 90 IQ and a lunch bucket and a belief system, and just go through and not question, whatever it is that's put in front of you. But it's not.
Yeah.
And just to sit and chat with him must have been terrific. That probably took you a week to come down from.
No, a week. I am still not down from it completely. After all, this was in 1990.
Okay.
It's one of those things when it's happening, you sort of take it for granted, and then you walk away and you realize what you've just had happen to you, and you don't believe it.
Right.
I mean, how many people get to meet their childhood hero? In most cases, you don't want to, because they rarely are going to live up to the image you've created in your mind.
Is that clay? What do they call that? Clay feet our heroes have?
Oh, sure, sure. But I can honestly say that Ted Williams surpassed any expectations I could have had of him.
Wow.
Because by the time I met him, he had mellowed and just an incredible being.
Very, very cool. Very great experiences. Larry, you mind if I call you that?
No, that's what I'm called.
Oh, okay. Thank you. This has been terrific.
Before we go, there's one blurb from the book I think you would enjoy hearing. Can I do that?
Sure, of course. I was thinking about your time restraints when I was closing out there. So I have all the time you want, believe me.
Okay, thank you. Now, this is a blurb from Ira Berkow, Pulitzer Prize winning former New York Times columnist and author of several books. And he had also written a blurb for Beyond DiMaggio, so he's been very kind to me. So his blurb for Baseball Italian Style is, there was once an advertising campaign for a rye bread that